Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Episode 46, Like Old Friends. Vanessa and Krista couldn't believe what just happened. They never expected James to resolve such a tense situation with his words alone. Mr. Tang also looked at James with gratitude. Although he did not know the man, he was impressed how he had read the situation, then handled it perfectly. Todd Berrigan had been right. The Palm restaurant employed 12 security guards, all of whom were monitoring the situation and waiting in the wings should trouble erupt. They knew not to intervene without Mr. Tang's consent, though. They didn't want to humiliate Todd, hoping instead that he might think it through and back off. But unexpectedly, the second young man handled himself with maturity and grace. Such a person was worthy of being a guest of the restaurant. As Todd disappeared into the night with his bodyguards, a crisp round of applause came from the heaven-class private room. What a self-possessed man! You didn't blink in the middle of that tirade. Excellent, excellent. Haha, young man, that was extraordinary. Well done. A figure emerged from the group. He was in his early 30s and he carried himself with the poise of the super wealthy. Although he gave off a relaxed vibe, he couldn't conceal his natural leadership and charisma. James could tell at a glance that this was someone worthy of his attention and respect. Krista stepped forward to make the introductions. Mr. Tucker, this is Elliot Klein. Mr. Klein, please meet James Tucker, your guest for this evening. The formal introduction was unnecessary. James and Elliot instantly knew who the other one was. Nice to meet you, Mr. Klein, James said. I appreciate the kind words from your other guests. I'm just glad I didn't make a fool of myself in front of you and everyone else. James was being modest, but his subtext was clear. He instinctively knew how to handle himself in difficult situations. The reason? Because he had 2 trump cards in his hand, and he knew exactly how to play them. The first card was the Palm restaurant itself. He knew that no one would be allowed to fight in such a high-class place, so he was never in any real danger of getting into a physical altercation. The second trump card was Elliot Klein. The entire episode had gone down less than 30 feet from the heaven-class private room. It was impossible for Elliot, seated inside with other guests, to miss the commotion. James was Elliot's invited guest that night. If something happened to him right under Elliot's nose and word got out about it, and it would, Elliot would be disgraced. Having grasped both realities in an instant, James was confident enough to stand up to someone like Todd Berrigan. But James had a third card up his sleeve. Actually, when he quietly harnessed the power of the Palm restaurant to deal with Todd, he wanted to gain an early advantage on Elliot Klein. He knew that Elliot in the heaven-class room nearby would be able to hear everything clearly. Unexpectedly, Todd wasn't a moron after all. Once he thought about it, he had enough sense to back off and leave the premises with his men. If he hadn't, and insisted on pressing the matter, James wouldn't have been afraid. He'd been in fights before and could handle himself. Because he wasn't the aggressor, nobody could fault him for defending himself. Todd hadn't cooperated in that sense, but the confrontation still provided James with his third ace. He played it when he made such a seemingly benign comment to Elliot. Actually, it was loaded with meaning. In an indirect way, James was expressing his dissatisfaction with the way he'd just been treated, which in turn played on Elliot's emotions, or rather, his guilt. The guy had invited him here for dinner, yet he was faced with an embarrassing public scene. Now Elliot would need to make it up to James. The ultimate goal was to cement a working relationship, or better yet, become friends with Elliot Klein. After that, even the Berrigan family would have to think twice before messing with James. There weren't many people in New York who could afford to fuck with the Silverbell Corporation. Sure enough, Elliot understood the meaning behind James's words. He grinned. I like you, he said simply. He swept his hand toward the heaven-class private room. Please, come in. Elliot knew James was blaming him for not coming out to put a stop to things while quietly watching from the pavilion. Rather than being threatened or offended by this, it made him even more curious about his guest. Before inviting him to dinner, Elliot had sent people to investigate James. He quickly discovered that not only was he the owner of 10 condos in the Lux Villa district, he also owned 10 floors of the Global Financial Center and the entire Orion building. But that was all the information his investigators could find. They failed to discover anything about James's background. The source of the funds to purchase so many valuable properties so quickly could only be traced to a large and mysterious organization. After getting the report, Elliot didn't feel apprehensive. Instead, he believed he should befriend someone like James no matter what. The fact that he apparently had a relationship of some sort with the daughter of David Harrison was only a bonus. For all of its power, the Silver Bell Corporation couldn't pull all the levers in New York on its own. Having the right allies was always the ultimate key to prosperity and survival. As Elliot ushered him and Vanessa into the Heaven classroom, James smiled. In the first round between the two men, he clearly had the upper hand. After taking their seats, Elliot poured 3 glasses of white wine. "Please accept my apologies for not intervening soon enough in that unfortunate scene," he said. "Let's have a drink together and start fresh." James quickly lifted his hand in mild protest. Mr. Klein, seriously, it's no big deal." "But it is," Elliot replied. "You were my guest. It was my mistake, so I apologize." When James saw that Elliot insisted on accepting blame for the incident, he decided to change tactics. "If you really want to make it up to me, why don't you let me poach Miss Moser from you? I think she's a superstar, and I could use someone of her caliber on my team." Elliot, Vanessa, and Krista looked at him, all equally surprised by the bold and frankly inappropriate request. Elliot didn't expect James to be such a frivolous person. A trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Vanessa's uneasiness towards Krista instantly went up several notches. Krista, always the low-key professional, didn't betray her thoughts, but she had no idea what James was doing. She never expected to become the topic of conversation during dinner. Could it be due to her good looks, she wondered? Was James really that shallow? James moved in quickly to end the awkwardness. "I'm just joking. You didn't take me seriously, did you? Come, let's have that drink." Elliot was relieved. He had specially arranged this dinner to befriend James. Now that James was taking the initiative, it saved him a lot of trouble. "All right, let's drink." James picked up his glass of wine and raised it to his host. But before they could drink, Elliot said, "Since I suspect we will be working closely together in the future, please call me Elliot." James was a little surprised by this. It tactily put their relationship on more equal footing. He couldn't figure out Elliot's angle. Elliot understood his guest's thoughts and continued, "I'm only a few years older than you. It just seems more appropriate." James decided to just go with the flow. "Very well. Cheers, Elliot." The two clinked their glasses and took a generous sip of their wine. "Cheers, James." Several glasses of wine later, the two men were getting along like old friends. They chatted and laughed as if they had just reunited after many years apart. Consumed in their bonding, it seemed that the women at the table had completely escaped their minds. Krista and Vanessa were feeling a little bored. Because Vanessa was so wary of Krista, it was impossible for the two of them to get beyond mundane pleasantries. At any other time, she would have long left such a boring gathering. But because of her feelings for James, things were different. She was already attracted to him, and now he had effortlessly befriended one of the most influential power brokers in New York. She couldn't exit the dinner early, even if she wanted to. This man was simply too intriguing. She decided to stay and watch. As endless bottles of wine were ordered and consumed, the conversation between the two men became increasingly warm. Eventually, James knew it was time to wind things down. "Elliot," he said, as the two of them sipped an after-dinner brandy, "I'm sure you have a busy day tomorrow, so we should head out soon." Perhaps the system had improved his tolerance for alcohol. Even after drinking multiple glasses of wine and now this brandy, he wasn't drunk at all. Elliot admired James's ability to handle his alcohol and appreciated his good sense. "You're right," he said. "We should call it a night." The dinner ended on a pleasant note. No bill was brought to the table. Krista would see to it tomorrow. It was how things were done at the Palm restaurant. Outside the entrance to the restaurant, Elliot shook James's hand and said, If you ever need anything, just call. James cordially expressed his thanks and watched as Elliot got into a Rolls-Royce Phantom that the valet already had waiting for him. He waved goodbye as the luxury sedan rolled off into the night. James turned to Vanessa and said, "I don't feel drunk, but I know I'm over the legal limit, so I'm afraid you will have to give me a lift. I'll leave the Ferrari here." Vanessa gave him a mock surprised look. "Oh, so now you trust me to drive? Don't worry. I promise to be a good girl and get you home safely." She'd actually been worried about how she could extend the evening with James. Now she had the perfect excuse. James was enamored by Vanessa's cute appearance. "Remember that I need a driver, not a racer." James then noticed Krista standing off to the side, apparently waiting for a ride. "Krista," he called out, "do you want to go with us?" Vanessa tensed. There was no way she wanted to share a car with that woman. Glancing at Vanessa, Krista could practically read her mind. The girl's eyes were too fierce. No, but thanks," Krista replied. "I'm just waiting here for the valet to bring my car around." "Okay then," James said. "Have a good night." The evening eventually concluded. He and Vanessa got into her car and left. Krista waited by the curb, thinking about this new friendship between her employer and James Tucker. On the other side of the road, in an Aston Martin DBS, one of Todd Berrigan's bodyguards whispered to his boss as he sat in the driver's seat. "Do you want us to take care of him, Mr. Berrigan?" Todd had seen everything that happened in front of the Palm. Initially, he wanted to stay back and teach James a lesson after he'd left the restaurant. But after seeing him and Elliot Klein parting like old friends, he knew better. He couldn't have James killed. At least not yet. "Forget it," he said. "We can't touch him. Tell the others to stand down." The bodyguard frowned. "Are we gonna let him go just like that?" "Just do as I say," Elliot snapped. Then he started the car and sped off. Episode 47. Buy some rat traps. After James buckled himself into the passenger seat, Vanessa punched his address in East Harlem into the Bentley's navigation system and drove out of the valet parking area. She had stayed there last night, so she remembered the place. It wasn't easy to forget for someone of her standing. She had no idea that James no longer lived there. The navigation system confirmed the setting. Destination set to 114 East 98th Street. In the passenger seat, James was leisurely enjoying the passing Manhattan nightlife when he heard his former address on the navigation system. "Why are we going there?" he asked. "I'm taking you home, of course. Don't you live there?" "Not anymore. I've said goodbye to that place. Head for Tribeca." Vanessa looked over at James. "Tribeca? Did you have too much to drink tonight?" She'd spent a lot of time in the chic and very high-end neighborhood. She had several friends there, all of whom could afford the expensive, spacious lofts that had once been textile firms, then artists' galleries, and now were luxury apartments. When she thought more about it, Vanessa wasn't surprised that James lived there. After all, he and Elliot Klein were friends now. James must have known that Silver Bell Corporation was the primary developer of the area and that Elliot was the man in charge. But the two of them had just met. Did Elliot gift him an apartment when she was speaking with Krista? It would be impossible for something like that to happen so fast. Seeing Vanessa's confusion, James reached over and entered his new address into the navigation system. "What? You think I'm not good enough for Tribeca?" Vanessa was embarrassed. "No, it's just such a sudden step up from East Harlem." She took a left at the next stoplight and followed the nav system's direction to their destination. James watched the street life and smiled. She's surprised now, he thought. Wait till she finds I own 10 condos in the Lux Villa district. As they approached the border of Tribeca, Vanessa asked, "So how's my driving?" She'd been taking it easy for James's sake, though her natural inclination would have been to gun it through the streets of Manhattan. James gave her a thumbs up. "Great, this isn't the Glen," he said, referring to the Watkins Glen International Speedway where Vanessa said she raced cars. "Safety first in the city." Vanessa slid the Bentley up to the entrance of the Murray building. By this point, she was no longer surprised by yet more evidence of James's mysterious fortune. A security guard stepped up to the vehicle. Vanessa coolly evaluated the man. He presented as sharp and professional. The rumor was all the security guards at the Murray building were retired special forces, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Delta Force. This guy definitely looked the part. Vanessa lowered the window. "Are you looking for someone?" the guard asked politely. Vanessa assumed that because she didn't live there, her Bentley Continental wasn't registered in the building system. "No, I'm not," she explained. "My friend lives here. He drank too much tonight and couldn't drive back himself, so I'm giving him a lift." As the security guard stepped away to speak into the discreet radio headset he wore, Vanessa heard the sound of tires approaching on the asphalt. Krista Moser stuck her head out from the driver's side of a BMW 740 Li and said to the guard, "Mr. Dreyer, it's okay. The passenger in that vehicle lives in Unit 44A. You can let them proceed." The guard nodded respectively. "Yes, Miss Moser," he said and waved them through. Krista looked over at Vanessa, expecting some sort of acknowledgement, but Vanessa only nodded coldly and drove into the building's underground parking garage. The fact was, Vanessa was jealous of Krista and thought she had ulterior motives. She didn't want James to see how effectively Krista wielded her authority even with the ex-military security guard. Krista sat in her BMW, confused. Did I do something wrong? She wondered. For some reason, Vanessa was being distinctly hostile to her. Vanessa eased the Bentley into a visitor's parking space and shut off the ignition. James sensed that she was pouting. "Hey, what's up with the cold shoulder to Krista? Did she offend you in some way at dinner?" Now James was confused. Was this beautiful woman sitting next to him really that possessive? Vanessa's pout quickly turned to anger. So you're taking her side now. Fortunately, James thought she looked even cuter when she was irritated. He couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny?" He snorted, trying to suppress his laughter. Vanessa just sulked in silence. Ding! As they were bickering, flirting like a married couple, James suddenly received a bank transfer message. He pulled out his phone and was stunned by the long string of zeros. He had no idea what just happened. As he sat there staring at his screen, his phone started ringing. It was Mitch Haynes. James picked up. "Hi, James. I just transferred the security deposit and first 3 months' rent for 3 floors of the Global Finance Center. I signed 3 tenants today. It's $15 million a year per floor for a total of $45 million annually. Check your phone to make sure that the transactions came through." James was pleased. Not only was he satisfied with the rental price, he truly admired Mitch's fast work. It had only been a day, and he had already rented out 3 floors. If this was what he was capable of, James knew he had picked a winner with this guy. Okay, confirming receipt. Although James was excited about such a large sum of money, he remained calm and composed as usual. He didn't want to praise Mitchell too much. It was not his nature to do so. Instead, he liked to express his appreciation with actions. After hanging up the phone, James wired Mitch a $15,000 bonus on Venmo to express his thanks for his new hire's efforts. Combined with the rent from the apartment, he had more than $50 million in liquid funds. He had never felt so financially secure in his life. His phone rang again. He looked at the ID. It was his former landlord, Glenn. James had no desire to take the call. This guy only cared about the goddamn rent. Then he thought about the irony of having just received so much rent money, not even a minute before his old landlord called looking for the rent. He picked up. "Hi, Glenn, what's up? Didn't I just give you the rent 2 days ago?" James deliberately called him by his first name. "You brat, how dare you call me by my first name? It's Mr. Foster to you." His old landlord was as arrogant as ever. James's patience was running thin. "Yeah, whatever, Glenn. Cut the crap and tell me what you want." Glenn was not put off by James's contempt. "Listen, kid, do you not want to continue renting the apartment?" James didn't beat around the bush. "As a matter of fact, no, I don't. To be more precise, I don't need it anymore. I moved out of your shithole yesterday. As for this month's rent, keep it. Do yourself a favor and put it towards rat traps. I found a fucking rat living in my oven. Then James hung up. Episode 48, Brothers for Life. Still buckled into the driver's seat of the Bentley, Vanessa turned towards James. There was finally a hint of confidence in her eyes. She now had no doubt that he really had moved to the Lux Villa district, one of the most prestigious addresses in Tribeca in all of New York. Even with her wealthy upbringing, like everyone else, she was dazzled by the lavishness of the place. So, the Murray. I'm impressed. James looked at her quizzically. Huh? That's odd. What? As an Harrison, I imagine you wouldn't be a stranger to fancy houses. You shouldn't be so surprised. How should I react then? Vanessa asked with an adorable smile. Let's go upstairs. You ain't seen nothing yet. What do you think? Is it up to your standards? James leaned back on the sofa, enjoying watching Vanessa explore the place and testing all of its lavish functions. Vanessa was having a ball using her voice to control the television, sound system, and curtains. Even the sofa could be adjusted by voice control. She was plenty used to extravagance, but this luxurious modern technology was relatively new to her. Her apartment, by comparison, was antiquated. The most high-tech appointments there were her Siri and a couple of clap-on, clap-off lights. This place was out of a sci-fi movie. This is amazing, James. I feel like I've walked into the future. James looked around with pride. This is the premier unit in the Murray. The AI is state-of-the-art. I'm still getting used to it myself, but so far it's been convenient and incredibly efficient. While Vanessa continued her tour, James's phone rang. It was his mother. It's my mom. Oh God, I haven't talked to my folks in days. He quickly clicked on the video call. Hi Mom, I'm sorry I haven't called. How are you and Dad? His smile was especially bright, Vanessa noticed. She couldn't help feeling envious of him because his mother was still alive. His mother's voice was laced with love. Your father and I are fine, dear. Never mind us. Tell us about you. Oh, I'm fine. I plan to come back in a few days. Really? You're coming back? Why? What's wrong? James was amused by her motherly concern. What? You don't want to see me? He joked. No, of course I want to see you. We miss you. It's just that I know you're busy with your job. Why are you coming home? At least her concern was logical. Often his mother fretted about low-probability dangers in the city, like riots and subway crashes. Mom, I just want to see you and Dad. Nothing more. I've got the time. James smiled. He did not say anything about giving them a luxury condo in the heart of New York City because he wanted to keep it a surprise until he saw them in person. Since when did you become so considerate? She asked. Well, it will be great to see you. I'll start making a list of things you can help me and Dad with. Then she launched into her usual recap of local goings-on. They finally fixed the access road, you know. Now we can get up to our house without driving through an obstacle course. Do you remember our neighbor's son, Ray? Apparently he's done quite well for himself in Washington. We heard he had something to do with it. His parents are so proud. James always enjoyed hearing the local gossip from his mom. It kept him connected with his rural upbringing. Of course I remember Ray. He's even younger than me. Then an idea flashed in his mind. He was not short of money now. Was there something he could do for his old town that would allow his parents to bathe in a little glory in front of their friends for a change? What would be something worth doing? They talked for a while longer about more hometown news. James's father joined the call for a few casual words. He wasn't as talkative as his mother, especially while using technology. His dad still favored the familiar corded phones, manual transmissions, print newspapers. Watching all this, Vanessa couldn't contain her envy. She was a child only 3 years old when her mother died. so she had never experienced the warmth and love she saw between James and his mom. She turned away when her eyes started to tear up. After James finished the call, she asked him, "When do you plan to go home?" "Oh, in about 2 or 3 days, I guess. Why? What's wrong?" He knew he had the college reunion the day after tomorrow, but Vanessa wouldn't know anything about that. "Oh, it's nothing. I was just asking." Her eyes swept through the living room, taking in the incredible splendor of the place. Suddenly, she blurted out, "I want to stay here tonight." Vanessa did not care if James agreed or not. She turned on her heels and walked up the stairs to the second-floor bedrooms. James just shook his head. I wonder if she never plans to leave. He didn't have any objections about that, of course. He was just a little curious. Why did this girl have so much trust in him? James woke up early the next day. He had a lot to do that day. First, he took a taxi to the Palm restaurant to get his car. Then he drove straight to the Orion building. He had called ahead of time, so Scott and Tom Marola were already waiting at the entrance of the building. As soon as he got out of the car, Marola walked up to him and said respectively, "Boss, let me park your car." James just nodded. He was quite satisfied with Mr. Marola's new attitude. Scott walked over and strung his arm around James's shoulder. "How you doing, man?" he said. He knew James was the boss now, but they were still friends. That would never change. James felt the same way. Regardless of status, he would always treat Scott on equal footing. "Hey, I'm fine. How's the work going? Did Tom behave himself?" "Haha. After you scared the shit out of him yesterday, he's been obedient ever since." Up in the office, Scott handed a ledger to James. "Here's an account of the rent I collected with Tom yesterday. It's more than $600,000 total. Not bad, huh?" James registered everything in the ledger instantly with his photographic memory. "Nice work, bro. I trust you to take care of the accounts yourself. All the income will belong to you in the future." That took Scott by surprise. "What? James, buddy, we're good friends and all, but I don't think that's appropriate, is it?" After all, it was close to $750 million. The annual rent of the entire Orion building was probably more than twice that. He couldn't dare accept so much money so casually. James just laughed and threw the ledger back to Scott. "Shut your pie hole and just be happy you're going to be fabulously rich. We're friends, right? Stop acting like you don't deserve a slice of my good fortune." Before Scott could respond, James stood up. "Come with me. I have a surprise for you." Scott was confused. "What?" "Let's go. Don't be a wimp." James pulled his friend out of the office. Half an hour later, they pulled up to the Lux Villa district and went inside. With little fanfare, James took a deed certificate from Krista and handed it to Scott. He pointed to the unit next to his on the sprawling property map on the wall and said, "My friend, this condo is yours." Scott just stared at the map. "Huh?" James ignored his friend's shock. "Krista, I'll leave the details to you, but please transfer ownership of this unit to Mr. Parker as soon as possible." Krista nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Then she turned to Scott and asked, "Mr. Parker, did you bring your ID? I can help you with the transfer procedures immediately." Scott's brain couldn't catch up with all the rapid changes. He first pocketed hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now James was giving him a property worth more than $100 million. "James, Dude, I own the place. We'll be neighbors from now on." Seeing that Scott was still hesitating, James tried to reason with him. He took on a more gentle tone. "Look, I'm not asking you to live here for free. I'm going abroad soon and I might be gone for a while. My parents will be staying in my place. I'm hoping you can help take care of them while I'm away. I trust you like a brother. Who else can I count on?" Hearing this, Scott couldn't refuse James anymore. "What else can I say but thank you? Thank you." Scott gripped James's hand tightly, his voice choking with emotion. James patted his friend's shoulder and said, "I don't use the word brother casually. Say no more." Just remember, we're brothers for life. Scott repeated the words sincerely. Yes, brothers for life. His eyes brimming with tears, Scott took out his ID and handed it to Krista Moser.
We are the one.
Episode 49. Will that be cash, credit, or Venmo? With Scott in Krista's capable hands, James headed up to Fifth Avenue to do some shopping. He planned to get a few decent suits and then head to Wempe Jewelers to buy some Patek Philippe watches. Since he had the money, he knew he should dress accordingly. Besides, tomorrow night was the reunion. It really wouldn't be appropriate to show up in his old clothes. Since Taylor wanted to be humiliated, James was more than happy to oblige. It was time for a bit of payback for Taylor and anyone else who thought they were too good for him. He had had enough of it. Fifth Avenue. Even before James had money, he always enjoyed strolling the boulevard alongside the thousands of tourists who thronged to one of the most exclusive retail stretches on the planet. From 42nd Street North to Central Park, one could find every luxury brand imaginable. Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Armani, Tiffany, Cartier, Harry Winston, Prada, Bergdorf Goodman, Saks. If a brand was in any way appealing to the rich and famous, you could find it on Fifth Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. An hour later, James entered Gucci's flagship New York shop. As soon as he walked in the door, a retail assistant, looking to be in her mid-30s and tastefully dressed, eyed him and his clothes with barely concealed suspicion. She had a name tag pinned to her blouse. Ashley LeClaire, it read. James naturally understood the deal. Employees in these high-end shops judged people based on their looks. It was as simple as that. He was too lazy to argue with her and, unbeknownst to Miss LeClaire, too rich to care. He really didn't need to bicker with a clerk. Not anymore. Mildly amused by the pageant about to unfold, James casually browsed a nearby display as Ashley approached. Sir, may I ask? Yes, thank you. I'm here to. If you are looking for a job, I'm sorry, but we do not hire male sales associates. Ashley's follow-up was even more ridiculous. She gave him what she apparently considered to be a dismissive look, turned her back on him and walked away, as if she expected him to slink out of the store in shame. The other employees continued about their business, but he could see them glancing in his direction. They looked annoyed by his presence. James didn't get angry. He chuckled to himself and continued right on browsing through the displays. When he took a suit off the rack and held it up in the mirror, Ashley sprung back in action. Sir, please don't handle the merchandise or I am going to have to call security. The nearby staff paused what they were doing and calmly watched the drama. James kept his cool, but he took distinct pleasure in swatting back at this snotty bitch. Miss LeClaire, I don't know how long you've been working here, but I would imagine you'd be experienced enough not to judge a customer on appearances alone. Now, if you don't care to assist me, I'd be happy to ask the manager if he or she can find someone who will. Ashley stared hard at him, her mind calculating the various outcomes of the standoff. A glimmer of doubt crept into her eyes, and James could practically read her mind. Now she was uncertain whether he was some celebrity she didn't recognize slumming it on a shopping spree in down-market clothes. If that were the case and he were to walk out of the store, then post about his shabby treatment on social media, she would lose her job. But she still couldn't bring herself to help him personally. Instead, she dialed back her tone just a notch and said, "Very well, sir. I will arrange for a staff member to assist you." James listened to the clippity-clip of her heels against the marble floor as she approached a young woman perched unobtrusively near another rack of men's suits. "Chloe, would you please see to this gentleman's needs?" The young sales assistant appeared to be around 20 years old. She approached James cautiously, an uneasy expression on her face. He could tell at a glance that she was a new hire. Ashley hovered nearby, ready to intervene if James turned out to be a middle-class poser with no intention to buy anything, wasting all of their times. A clearly nervous Chloe addressed James politely. "Hello, I'm Chloe Harrison, and I'll be serving you today. May I ask if you have any particular requests?" He gave her a warm smile. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Harrison. I don't have any special needs. I just want to buy some suits. Shall we take a look around?" He then led the way to the nearest display rack and began to explore the offerings. Chloe dutifully stood behind him, a little self-conscious by the passive role she'd been thrust into. Ashley LeClaire and the other shop assistants could not help but watch this spectacle with outright scorn. They all felt that this oaf was obviously putting on a show. There was no way he'd be able to afford even a single suit in the store. As James browsed the merchandise, Ashley and the others felt as if they were watching a show. One long-haired clerk, Madison, whispered to her coworker, "What's your guess about this guy?" The other girl laughed quietly. "I think he's going to say, 'Oh, my girlfriend is looking for me. I'm sorry, I need to go.'" Madison giggled too. "No, I think he'll say, 'I'm sorry, my stomach suddenly hurts. I need to go to the restroom.' Then he'll slip out a side door." Although he couldn't hear them, James was fully aware he was being mocked. Chloe was too, but she was embarrassed by her coworker's behavior. Seeing her face turn red, James comforted her in a low voice. "Don't bother with them. I don't need you to show the clothes to me. Just follow me and carry the suits I give you, please." Chloe looked at James and knew right away that not only was he a good person, he could afford Gucci clothes. She nodded knowingly, and her attitude changed from nervousness to seriousness as she followed him through the showroom. James ultimately settled on 4 of the most expensive suits in the store. Satisfied with his selection, he said to Chloe, "Thank you, Miss Harrison. Take me to the checkout, please." By now, Chloe was a little dazed by all of this. Although she was not an expert on these particular suits, she could still read the price tags. The suits he picked out cost close to $3,000 each. The 4 suits added up to around 12 grand. Chloe maintained her professional composure, but inside she was elated. If she closed this sale, she would definitely work her way up in the store's sometimes catty hierarchy. As soon as she gained enough experience, she planned to find another job anyway. Everyone in the shop, including Ashley, was now openly staring at James. Most of them still felt the sale would fall through in some sordid way. Maybe his credit card would be declined, or one of this guy's moron friends would emerge with a camera, having secretly filmed the whole charade to be posted online. But that was not the case. James followed Chloe all the way to the cashier. Although the clerks at the counter were still in disbelief, they had no choice but to settle the bill and pack up the suits for him. The senior clerk handed the suits to James respectfully and asked, "Sir, will you be paying by cash, credit card, or Venmo today?" The rest of the staff still couldn't believe it. They watched and waited. It was the moment of truth. What was this guy going to do now? Episode 50, Gucci VIP. James glanced at Ashley LeClaire, who was also looking at him. He grinned and said, "I'll go with a wire transfer." Everyone watched silently as the cashier processed the sale. After a moment, she looked up. "Thank you for shopping at Gucci, sir. We look forward to your next visit." The employees were stunned. The payment was successful. Ashley's face was ashen. Never in her wildest dreams would she have thought that James was really a low-profile big shot. He didn't even blink when he bought $12,000 worth of clothes. Unfortunately, she would not be benefiting from the sale. The commission that should have been hers would go to the newbie Chloe Harrison. She couldn't believe it. James ignored the tittering and gazes of the crowd. He nodded appreciatively at Chloe, picked up his clothes, and walked towards the exit. A dignified gentleman suddenly appeared from a back room, breaking the awkward atmosphere in the showroom. He walked purposely towards James and caught his attention before he could exit the store onto 5th Avenue. "Hello, sir. I am the manager of Gucci, New York, Antoine Fay. I am happy to be at your service. May I know your name? James appraised the manager. Mr. Fay was an elegant man with a refined presence. My name is James Tucker. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Tucker. It is also my pleasure to inform you that you have met the requirements to become a VIP customer at Gucci. If you wouldn't mind waiting a moment, I will process a VIP card for you. Although James was tempted to laugh in the guy's face, he quickly decided to accept the store's generosity. Besides, he had nothing urgent to do at the moment. Without saying a word, he merely nodded his approval. Antoine was delighted. Excellent, Mr. Tucker. This way, please. He took the initiative to relieve James of his bags before leading him to the VIP customer lounge. It was a swanky private room in the back, appointed with plush sofas, gorgeous flowering plants, full-view mirrors, and an elegant bar. After seeing that James was comfortable with a cup of fresh coffee, he left the lounge to get him his VIP card. Antoine was a seasoned professional in the luxury service industry, accustomed to catering to the egos and desires of the affluent. Only now did James truly understand what good service was. James scrolled through his phone and enjoyed his coffee. After about 5 minutes, Antoine Fay returned and held out a jet black plastic card with silver lettering. Mr. Tucker, I am pleased to present you with a Gucci VIP card. It can be used at any Gucci retailer in the world. James accepted the card and stood up. As he prepared to leave, Chloe Harrison entered the lounge and picked up his bags. She said politely, "Allow me to see you out, Mr. Tucker." James was touched by her attention to detail. He turned to Antoine and said, "Mr. Fay, I'd like you to know that Miss Harrison's service today was excellent. I was not happy with the treatment I received from the other sales staff, though. That goes especially for Ashley LeClaire. If it weren't for Miss Harrison and now you, I wouldn't step foot in a Gucci outlet for the rest of my life." Antoine's expression instantly turned cold. "I am terribly sorry. I will see to the matter right away." To James's surprise, the manager summoned Ashley and some of the other showroom staff to the VIP lounge. "As of today, Miss Harrison is promoted to senior sales assistant," he announced. "Miss LeClaire," he continued without ceremony, "you're fired. The rest of you, apologize to Mr. Tucker, or you will be next." Antoine's way of doing things was brutally decisive. James realized that this was how things worked in the big leagues of high-end retail. There was no room for error when tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars were on the line with every customer. Ashley LeClaire started crying on the spot. She regretted her presumptuous arrogance, but it was too late. The other employees apologized softly to James and went back to their stations. "Mr. Tucker, are you satisfied now?" Antoine asked. James waved his hand. "Forget it. I'm not that vengeful of a person, but I just don't like people who look down on others. Life is complicated enough without having to put up with that kind of bullshit." With that, James left the store. His next stop was the world-famous Wempe Jewelers to look for a Patek Philippe Swiss watch. This time, however, he had the Gucci bags in his hands. Although he was not wearing one of his new suits, things went much smoother. As the Wimpy staff tended to his needs, James reflected on his experience that day. Many of the people who inhabited this new world of wealth he found himself in were indeed materialistic and shallow. But he didn't have to worry about it. He was rich himself now, yet, unlike others, he didn't feel the need to bully a few rude shop assistants. He lived by the principles he'd learned while growing up. If others did not offend him, he would not offend them. He kept to his own devices, didn't stick his nose in other people's business. But if someone bullied him, he would make them pay the price. After buying some watches, a few Patek Philippe's as planned, and a sharp Tag Heuer on a whim, James went to Chanel to pick out 3 fashionable women's bags and then drove back to the Murray. Although it was still early, Vanessa had already left. James had nothing to do, so he laid down on the sofa and pulled out his phone. The first thing he checked was the Wexford College alumni group chat. Taylor had just posted that the reunion tomorrow night would be at the fashionable Jane Hotel in the West Village, currently one of the hippest places in the city. The group chat that followed was lively. It seemed that everyone had forgotten about the awkward incident in the chat the other night. Ding! Just then, James received a private message from Gavin Delaney. "Are you there?" He replied right away. "Yeah, man. Long time no see." When they were at Wexford, James always had a good relationship with Gavin. He was different from other students. Although he was also part of the wealthy set, Gavin had never looked down on James, even though he knew James had grown up in the country. The two had similar personalities and interests and hit it off from the start. "Yup, it's been a long time. How are you doing?" "I'm fine." James was sprawled out on his spacious leather sofa, his whole body relaxed. He wasn't lying. He was fine. "Great," Gavin replied. Knowing that James came from a poor family, Gavin figured his old friend was putting up appearances. He understood what might happen between James and Taylor at the reunion the next night, which was why he'd reached out. The two of them chatted for a while about old times and people they knew. Then Gavin got to the point. "Buddy, I've done pretty well for myself. What do you say I duke you some money for a clothes shopping spree? Get yourself something sharp for tomorrow night." James laughed. If only Gavin knew. "Thanks, bro, but I'm all set." Nonetheless, James was touched by Gavin's consideration. He knew the offer wasn't because his friend looked down on him. Gavin really cared about James and wanted him to make a good impression on his former classmates. Gavin replied instantly. "Seriously, man, take it. Just think of it as a token of our friendship and all the good times we had." James felt weird rejecting Gavin's sincere kindness. He gave in. Okay, thank you." But he'd already thought of a proper thank you in return. Tomorrow he'd give Gavin a Patek Philippe. Then his friend would realize how far up in the world James had come too. Episode 51. He doesn't have the balls. It was a mild evening, around 20 after 6, when James pulled up to the Jane Hotel in his Ferrari 812. He came 20 minutes late on purpose. He knew it was silly and vain, but he wanted to be the last to arrive at the Wexford College class of 2018 reunion. That way all his former classmates would see him walk in. He wanted to make an immediate impression. The current James Tucker was no longer the James Tucker of the past. He was not the poor kid from the hills. He was loaded. He was one of them. The Jane was a stylish boutique hotel in the heart of the West Village. Built in 1908, it had been completely refurbished with riverview rooms, a rooftop bar and nightclub, and a spacious ballroom where the reunion was being held. The only problem was the parking. It was impossible to find a space in that part of town at that time of night. James drove around the block until he found a parking lot that was already full. He wedged his car into a spot near the exit and got out. At first, the attendant was sputtering in anger, unleashing a string of profanities as only a New York City parking lot attendant can do, but James quickly smoothed it over with a handshake and palm C-note. Besides, the guy turned out to be a car nut. He was practically drooling over the fire-red Ferrari. A little after 6:30, James, wearing a Gucci suit and a Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, drifted smoothly into the Jane Hotel. He made the impression he was hoping for. Naturally handsome, dressed to perfection, more than a few women stole a glance at him as he made his way through the lobby. Heather Cassidy and Gavin Delaney sat side by side behind the reception table at the entrance to the ballroom. They were in charge of welcoming their classmates to the reunion. Only 2 name tags remained on the table, meaning most everyone had already arrived. 32 people total had RSVP'd to the event. Gavin looked at the tags on the table and needlessly remarked, "Only 2 people aren't here yet." "Which 2?" Heather asked. "Taylor and James Tucker." Heather rolled her eyes, but in an admiring sort of way. Taylor always likes to be the last to show up, she said sweetly. She completely ignored the fact that James wasn't there. After all, the Taylor family was one of the most prominent in New York. Important people like them often arrive late to events like this. Heather naturally classified Taylor as a member of that elite tribe. In fact, Heather was much closer to Taylor than many of the others. She knew that he had already started taking over the reins to his family business. He was undoubtedly the most successful and powerful graduate of their class. Gavin glanced at Heather, feeling a little irritated. He was put off by her snobbish fawning over Taylor, but he didn't say anything. As if on cue, Taylor emerged from the elevator and approached the reception table. Heather saw Taylor coming up the corridor and rushed over to greet him. "You're finally here. You're always late," she teased. "But welcome, welcome." Taylor gave Heather one of those pretentious air kisses on each cheek that rich people like to do. "Traffic was murder getting here. Sorry I'm late. Thank you for your hard work today." From the look in his eyes, it was obvious he was pleased with Heather's flattery. "How is it? Is everyone here?" he asked casually, acting as if this were his private party. "Yup," Heather said. "Everyone's here." "Fantastic. Let's go in, shall we?" Taylor and Heather approached the welcome table arm in arm, where Gavin, having watched the entire spectacle with disgust, sat with a phony smile plastered on his face. He despised Heather not only for her blatant ass-kissing, but because she ignored the fact that James had not yet arrived. Clearly, Heather was afraid of mentioning James's name in front of Taylor. She casually brushed off his friend as if his presence here was of no significance. Taylor greeted Gavin with insincere charm, then fixed his name tag to his Brooks Brothers suit and prepared to enter the room. "Come on, Gavin. Everyone's here now. What are you waiting for?" "Head on in, Taylor," Gavin replied. "James Tucker isn't here yet. I'll wait for him." Hearing James's name, Taylor scowled with undisguised contempt. He looked questioningly at Heather. "He hasn't come yet?" She matched Taylor's disparaging tone. "No, not yet. Maybe he decided not to come after all." Taylor snickered and turned to Gavin. "You don't have to wait anymore. I highly doubt he'll have the guts to show up tonight." He then pushed open the ballroom door and walked in with his head high. Gavin thought he looked ridiculous, like some sort of wannabe Roman emperor. But he too started to wonder whether James would come. He looked to the end of the empty corridor, then took out his phone and left a voice message for his friend. He turned and followed Taylor and Heather into the room. After all, in New York City, the reality was that Taylor's family held a lot of sway. He was someone Gavin could not afford to offend if he wanted to maintain his position among the right sort of people. The energy in the ballroom changed instantly when Taylor walked through the door. One by one, everybody there began calculating how they could nonchalantly cross his path to greet and flatter him. Taylor accepted their attention gracefully. He returned their greetings in a gentlemanly manner, like Don Corleone holding out his ring to his capo regimes. There were two people, however, who stood apart from all this nonsense. One of them was Gavin Delaney, who had just entered the room and headed straight for the bar. He refused to flatter the former class president not only out of loyalty to James, but also because he simply couldn't stand Taylor. The other was Katie Williams. She sat in her seat and didn't even glance at Taylor as he swanned around the room. When Taylor saw Katie, he immediately made his way over to her table. "Hello, Katie. It's so nice to see you again," he said. Katie paid him no heed. She wouldn't even look at him. Her disrespect was that blatant. LaToya Greenwood, who was sitting next to Katie, nudged her lightly with her elbow. Katie pretended not to notice. Everyone remembered what had happened in the group chat a few days ago. Her behavior was equivalent to slapping Taylor in the face. Taylor did not get outwardly angry, but he was uncharacteristically at a loss for what to do. The atmosphere turned a little awkward. Sensing the tension in the air, Heather tried to resolve the situation. She actually clinked her cocktail glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention like some sort of cheesy MC at a banquet. "Would everyone take their seats, please? Dinner is almost ready to be served." It took a few minutes for the milling classmates to find their seats. Once everyone had settled down, Heather announced, "All right, let's invite our former class president Taylor to give us a few words." Heather led the applause. The others happily followed suit, eager to display their allegiance to the top dog at the reunion. Taylor stood. He was well aware of his status, whether as the class president or the leading young baron in the room. It was only natural for him to deliver a short speech. But just as he cleared his throat, Katie said, "Wait a second. Not everyone is here yet." Taylor gave her a phony half-smile, pretending he didn't already know that. "What? Who's missing?" She paid no attention to his performance. James Tucker isn't here." James's ex-girlfriend, Natalie Cooper, flinched when she heard his name. Taylor gave a contemptuous little laugh. "I'm pretty sure he won't be here tonight." He knew it was beneath him, but it felt good to ridicule James. He honestly thought the guy wouldn't show. He didn't have the balls. Obviously, Taylor had won this round. Seeing Katie glancing at the ballroom door, he grinned and spread his hands. "It's been half an hour, Katie. We can't hold everything up for him." Katie felt alone amid all her classmates who wanted to get on with the evening. She had no choice but to sit back and take a long sip of her martini. There was a trace of disappointment in her eyes. Sitting next to her, Gavin also looked disappointed. He had been looking forward to reuniting with a friend he hadn't seen for a few years, but now it seemed. Right then, the door to the room was pushed open, and a seemingly unfamiliar figure walked in.